Welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. Again, I'm your host, Jeremy Howlett. I am excited today to have James Lawrence on here, also known as the Iron Cowboy. Welcome, James.
Thanks, brother. And this is kind of like a full circle moment. We go like decades back, brother. It's been fun to
No,
watch
this is
both
great, right? Like this
both
is
of our journeys
so
unfold.
yeah. So to introduce you, James, like your powerhouse in pushing beyond physical barriers. We first met just shortly after you'd completed setting the world record in the most half iron distance races in a single year. And then shortly after that, we started sponsoring you with Ultra, and then you went on to break the world record for most iron distance events done in a single year, which now, yeah, it pales in comparison to what else you've done, because then you went on to beat the odds in 2015 and pushed beyond the doubters to run an iron distance event in every single state each day for 50 straight days and deal with that logistical craziness, which we'll probably get into. You've been termed the most enduring man in the world by Success Magazine, and James, the accolades continue with 101, right? Yeah. 101 consecutive iron distance events and spending his time as a speaker, athlete, author, and family man. James, it's awesome to have you. I hesitated on that 101. I just wanted to make sure because I remember, because it's always been talked about as the 100, right? And that was the goal. But then you went out and the next day you said, screw it, we're going to go do one more.
Yeah.
And
when people are introducing me for my stage time, I say, hey, make sure you don't say 101 because it's kind of a reveal during the presentation. But in this context, it's great. Yeah. And obviously we'll get into what the 100 was and why I chose to do 101. But I wanted to say, like, the reason our paths crossed initially, one, your wife used to always whoop my butt in the local circuit fair triathlon. She's an absolute beast and a savage.
She is a beast.
It was so fun to compete alongside her. She was a beast. But then, yeah, with Ultra, I remember I was wearing a prototype, one of the first prototypes that came out, and it was in my still to this day PR Ironman in Cozumel, Mexico. And that day, it just like massive rain came down and the streets got flooded on the marathon. So there was this one section where you had to like trudge through knee high, we'll call it water, but it was sewage. And the shoes, it was in the early days, but the insoles had slipped out the backside of the shoes. And so I ended up pulling out the insoles of the shoes and doing half the marathon of the Ironman in gutted Ultra shoes, and then broke several world records in them. So they served me well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I remember. I think we first met or heard of you because my wife was working at a local triathlon shop, Power Tri here, and I think they were sponsoring you, but you had been tied into them a little bit, and so it was just through that little circuit, right? And then came like we supported you through the 50-50-50, right? And
well, the 30 and the 30 and the 50.
Right, absolutely. The 50-50-50 though, like that event in and of itself, right? Like the logistics and everything. Like I remember internally with our parent company at Ultra having conversations about, oh, James is doing this, and I pushed so hard to get a lot more support, and nobody would back it, right? Like whatever, this guy's gonna blow up after 5 days, like he'll be lucky to make a dozen days, right? Like, I'm like, no, like he's going to do, like, it's going to happen. And I remember I was actually on a road trip with my family when you were doing it. I was sitting in church that this was in New York City.
I remember getting this message from you, actually.
Long Island. We were on Long Island at church with my sister and her family. And this guy in Sunday school is talking about, there was this guy that just came through New York. He's on like day 30 of this 50 state. I went out and I was there and I was like, yeah, I know that guy. We're friends. I support him. Like, and it was just the coolest thing. It was like, okay, like some random dude all the way across the country just brought it up randomly in Sunday school. Like it was the coolest thing. And then like, as you started to get, right, like as you started to get closer to day 40, then finally our parent company, what can we do? How can we capitalize off of this, right? Like now people are starting to believe, right? Like, and it took 30 to 35 days
Well,
before the
and that's
belief
the
was real. Like,
well, and that's the
and
crazy thing too, is, when we were trying to, get sponsors and get help and do all this, the number one thing I kept getting back is like, we can't afford to associate ourselves with a failure. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I just broke 2 world records and this is kind of the next thing. And from where we sit, it was always the next natural progression on our journey. But to the newest person here in the story, the gap was so big from what they knew to be possible and then what they believed to be possible. And I think that's a super valuable message, is you have to believe in yourself first before anybody else is going to, give you any street cred or any credibility or anything. Like, you have to figure out how to believe in yourself and have that incentric motivation to do it or to accomplish it. And then the part of that story that I love about that guy in New York is we truly have no idea the impact that we're having. We don't know who's watching or what we're doing. And so the importance to show up in a capacity, not knowing who's watching. And one of the kind of moments where I realized that the most, like, that we truly don't know, and the power of the social media and the web is, I was speaking at an event in Bangkok, Thailand. I'm like hardly speaking there, and nobody knows I'm there. It was a really small event, kind of a random off thing. And I'm walking through the mall in Bangkok. And this little Thai dude just stops dead in his tracks. His face, he was like, "Oh my gosh, are you the Iron Cowboy?" And I was like, "Am I being pranked right now? Like, are you friggin' kidding me?" Like this, and it was the best day of his life. And it just like really proved to me, like, we truly have no idea who's watching, who we're having an impact on, whether it's positive or negative. That moment in Thailand, in the, like, really far from where I live, where I grew, like, exist, and all. I was impacting that person. And so it was just a really cool lesson for him.
no, it's awesome. It's, yeah, we'll get into a lot of this, right? But I think, like, there's a couple key lessons there, right? Like, but one of them is, you talk about the jump, right? Going from 30 iron distance races over the course of a year, right? Like, you did this over the course of a year. I remember coming out and supporting. I remember being down in Havasu when you did that one, and that that was a triumph, right? Like, that was a great moment because you didn't do it alone, right?
Yeah. In fact, to this day, that's probably my favorite Ironman ever that I've done, and I'll tell you why. So just to give context to listeners, because I realize we live in these little bubbles and we know what an Ironman is, and then I travel around the world, or I'm in an Uber, and
True.
they always
Yeah,
ask me
we
what I do
probably
and
ought to talk
whatnot.
about what the distance actually is,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. And then I'm like, so someone driving me in the middle of Ohio or like Iowa. I'm like, "Hey, do you know what do you do?" I'm like, "Well, do you know what an Ironman is?" And they're like, "No, is it like weightlifting?" And I'm like, "No, okay." So then I got to explain it. So just for anybody that doesn't know what an Ironman is, it is a triathlon, and a triathlon has many distances: sprint, Olympic, half, and full. Ironman is a brand of the distance that is the longest of the family. And so an Ironman, or full distance triathlon, is 2.4-mile swim, 12-mile bike ride, and it finishes with a standard 26.2-mile marathon run. So that's 140.6 miles. And my funnest thing to say is that NBC Sports says it's the hardest single day in sports. And so on day 27 of 30 in that world record, we were in Lake Havasu, Arizona. And the reason that day was so special is because I had an opportunity to pull a young man named Dayton, who was born with a condition that's called cerebral palsy. He's just trapped inside of his own body. And I saw on social media, it was actually Mormon.org, it was their YouTube channel, and it was titled Dayton's Legs. And it was a young man in his church was pulling him through one of those mini sprint triathlons. And so I saw that, and I was like, "Man, that's incredible. I wonder if he wants to be an Ironman. Can we do an Ironman together?" And so I got in contact with Mormon.org, and they put me in contact with Shireen, who's the mom. And I found out that Dayton feels alive when he's doing this kind of racing, and she runs a lot with him because he can feel the wind in his face. I mean, you can imagine if you're an individual that your brain is sound, but you're just trapped inside your body, what that would be to not be able to engage in life or activity or adventure. And so we immediately started trying to put it together. And there's a great video on YouTube. If you just search Iron Cowboy Dayton, and then if you really want to get specific, Filmingo, Filmingo, and it'll bring up about a 14-minute video of that day. Literally my favorite story to tell from stage. I get to go around the world and share that day that I got to spend with Dayton.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I love that story. I love that you incorporated him into that journey, right? And I love the other aspects that you incorporated into all of your journeys, right? Like the 50-50-50, you concluded everyone with a 5K race, right? Like, and incorporating that. The other thing that you pointed out, so going from 30 in a year, over the course of a year, right? And also a reminder, right? Like an Ironman is done in one day. It's done in a single day. It's not that you go out and swim, then the next day you go bike, and then the next day you go run, right? That's the number one question when my wife and I'll talk to people, and she'll be like, yeah, I run ultras, I run 100 miles. And they're like, oh, how many days does that take you?
Yeah, like it's consecutive.
It's consecutive. I don't sleep, right? Like,
yeah.
And so you're looking at, okay, now we're going to go do this iron distance event, and now we're going to back up 50 of them, and we're going to travel over the course of the middle of the night, right? Like, and this wasn't private chartered jets, right? Like you guys were literally, like, you flew commercial, and then in the couple of times that you needed to fly, and then everything else was RV.
Yeah, so it started in Hawaii, and in order for the logistics to work, we started at midnight. So as soon as it turned to the next day, jumped in the pool, swam the 2.4, biked the 112, ran the marathon, flew from Hawaii to Honolulu, caught the last flight out, landed in first thing in the morning in Alaska. So no sleep, wake up, or not wake up, but get off the plane, put your bike together, do Ironman number 2 in Alaska, no sleep, jump on a plane, fly to Washington, touchdown, and then that's where the team met us. And we all piled into a motorhome, and then every single day navigated the lower 48. So Ironman in the day, travel at night on the motorhome, doing the best we could, chaos, confusion, averaged 4 hours of sleep a night for 7 consecutive weeks, on top of the fatigue and exhaustion of doing the actual Ironman. The logistics is just insane. I'm being from Canada. I knew, but you don't realize the U.S. is until you try to drive it in 50 days and do 40 miles human powered in between each.
Yeah, it's a feat, right? Like just to drive across the country and then to do it and try to fit in an event in every state along the way.
I always joke, and if someone wants a sense of what we did, I just said, look, take five kids, take 5 of your kids if you have them, put them in a motorhome ages 5 to 12, and just drive to every state and get an ice cream cone and see how difficult that is just to do and replace ice cream cone with.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like I've taken my kids to all 50 states, right? And so we've done the road trips a few times, but we were not getting out doing Ironmans in each day, right? Like, so, but I know the logistics of like travel, right? Like just traveling across the country. And when you get back east, okay, it's kind of easy. I can go do the tri-state area and hit Delaware and some of that pretty quick and easy, right? But out west, right? Like it's like, okay, I got to do North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wisconsin, right? Like, and all it, like, those are big states. Like,
well, you get Utah, Texas, Nevada, California, Oregon, Washington. Those are massive states.
Yeah. No, so that's crazy. Well, okay. And then you kind of culminated, at least to this point, your endurance career with 101. The goal and the objective was 100 days consecutively of doing an iron distance event. And it was in a more controlled environment. You did it all here in Utah, right? Same course every day. But talk to us a little bit about 101.
Yeah. Well, let's back up just a second and kind of maybe talk about why the 100 happened. And so, well documented in our book, Redefine Impossible, and in the documentary that's on Amazon Prime called Iron Cowboy. Well documented the mistakes that we made that were very public. And we got put through the ringer for these mistakes. And at the end of the day, we made the decision to continue based off of these mistakes, or despite these mistakes, because the goal was to raise money for the childhood obesity epidemic that was happening, which is why we did that 5K every single night that you mentioned. And real quick side note, my daughter, Lucy, ended up doing all 55Ks in all 50 states to help like drive that as a 12-year-old girl. So it was really, really cool. And so I'm kind of wired in a way, and I think most people are like, when you make a mistake, hopefully you want to like look at it, take your accountability, realize what was your fault, what wasn't, and then continue on in life, but try to do things at a higher level or better. And so I just right after the 50, I got pushed into the speaking circuit, and I've now been speaking professionally for 10 years. I love it. It's a ton of fun. I get to change the way people think and show up in their lives. And we've spoken in over 50 countries. Can you believe that, Jeremy? It's been crazy.
It's awesome.
And so I've just got to see the world. But I always had it on the back of my mind, like, man, I wish I could do the 50 again, and that would be amazing. I want to do it better, and I know I can do it better because I've learned from my past, and I've got more knowledge, and all these things kept going through my mind. And you sit on an airplane, you got a lot of thinking time. I heard of somebody say one time, it was brilliant. They're like, any problem can be solved on a coast to coast flight. And so that's what I do is I sit and I meditate and I think and I dream on these airplane rides. I'm actually this coming up trip, I'm headed to Spain. I'll hit 1 million miles. And so I don't know that that's a proud statistic, but I'm about, I always hit and that's not like American Express, I purchased miles. That's like butt and seat miles, 1 million. It's crazy. And so I just always had that in the back of my mind, like, okay, I wish I could do it again. But it's 6 years later when the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, my calendar got wiped clean. Speaking, coaching, racing, like it's all gone. And it impacted everybody, but some people could still work, and mine disappeared. And so instantly I was like, this is it. This is my opportunity. And everyone around me is like, what are you talking about? You're fat, you're out of shape. Like, this is not your opportunity. And I said, no, if I can remove chaos, like logistics, confusion, and everything from travel, if I can put the right system and team in place and learn from those experiences, could we double what everybody said was impossible? Could we defy logic? Because the purpose of the 50 initially was, how many consecutive could I do? Well, I really didn't get to find that out because the chaos and the logistics and the travel just exhausted you. So it wasn't a true test of that. And then so we decided on 100, and we were going to do it locally here. And so it started on March 1st, 2021. And for 100 consecutive days.
So why did you pick, like, sometimes, right, like we talk about, like I've had a few guests on here where we talk about goals and goal setting, right? Like, and a lot of times goal setting is just pulling an arbitrary number out of the air. Was 100 just an arbitrary number? It was like, okay, that's double what we've done. Like, that sounds good. Or like, is there,
there's a little bit more to it. And actually there's a lot more to it. So one of my main sponsors and kind of a company I've worked with for a long time is First Form. And First Form is run by Andy Frisella, their nutrition company. And he's actually the one that came out with the program 75 Hard. And they were going to end up being the title sponsor to this while we were figuring out what exactly it was going to be. And so initially I was going to do 75 because they were going to be the title sponsor, really aligned with their brand and that stuff.
And that's 25 more than you've done.
25 more than I had before.
Like,
and I was like,
legit,
okay, that's
right? Like
that's legit. And the more I let that marinate, I'm like, dude, 75 doesn't scare me. And then it got pushed out a little bit to 100. And I was like, that I believe is a push. And that's how we settled on it. And then the other side of that too is I'm fascinated with the story of the marathon monks. And I don't know if you're familiar with them. First, it's worth like finding the Google story and putting it in the show notes so people can look deep dive into
the
it.
marathon monks. Okay.
Marathon monks. But in essence, it's these Japanese monks, and there's this mountain, I think it's called Mount Hinai. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the base of the marathon the base of the mountain is a marathon distance. And the challenge is it's over the course of 3 years, but they end up doing 1,000 marathons. And there's a couple ultras in there to win. So when somebody says to me like, oh, I'm breaking the marathon record, I'm like, according to Guinness, yes, but do your research. There's these dudes in Japan that crush you. And so I was like, that's cute that you think that. And so the legend goes, there's several monks that have done it. One gentleman has done it 3 separate times. And
so he's done 1,000 in a 3-year period of time, 3 different times.
And there's certain, like you have to do certain consecutive, like really laid out on what they do. There's a lot of meditation, and they're wearing like straw shoes. They're like, it's crazy. And anyways, any point in time from day 0 to 100, you can quit. But if you start day 101, you're committing to the rest of the journey. And if you quit any time between 1 and 1,000, you have to sacrifice yourself on the trail, meaning end your life. And so there is monuments on this trail. Like, I want to go to Japan and walk this trail and like pay respect to the people, like the culture and the people out there. There's monuments on this trail of monks that didn't make it, that made that commitment. So to me, day 101 was symbolism and a commitment to myself for the rest of my life in terms of excellence and discipline and integrity, all these things that I believe in and what our brand stands for. That's why I did 101. In addition to, I would be a hypocrite if I got on stages around the world and I'm like, hey, I get it. You're broken. You're defeated. You're backed into a corner, anxious, depressed, but you can get up and do one more. And I believe leaders lead from the front. I wanted to showcase, like, look, goals accomplished, did what I said I was going to do. I don't have to, but I'm going to showcase that it's possible. And so that's the messaging of why I did it. So there's a lot to the reasons.
So at what point did you decide to do 101?
Another great question. So literally inside the first 10. So if you're not familiar with our story, there is books and documentaries. You can go to Amazon Prime. There's two gentlemen on my journey that are pivotal. And we call them the wingmen. And they're my best friends now. We do a lot of business together. I'm seeing them both tonight. Casey, second grade school teacher. Aaron, just 10 years my younger, was just kind of trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. And they both said, we got you. We're coming on the 50.
Yeah, Casey and Aaron were pivotal. Like, not your wife was the reason you did the 50. Like, let's make sure that she, like, Sunny was the
Sunny's
reason
the
50.
Sunny's the queen. Like, yeah, for sure. There's no, it doesn't even need to be said.
But Aaron and Casey, well, it definitely needs to be said. We'll throw that. Sunny, we got you. It definitely needs to be said.
Yeah, for sure.
But Casey and Aaron, absolutely. Like, without those two, again, it probably doesn't happen, right? Like, they've been by your side through all of this. So yeah, they definitely deserve.
In fact, and then you're gonna have to remind me of the original question because I forgot already. Yesterday, I was doing a different podcast and they asked me the question, hey, it's 10 years from now, you're at an award show. You have to thank someone. It can't be your family. Who are you thanking? And like, I'm like, that's the easiest question in the world. It's Casey and Aaron. Like, this does not get done without those two young men sacrificed. What was the original question?
So at what point did you decide 101 had to happen? Yeah,
for sure. We're in like day 6, 7, or 8, and I'm like dying, suffering. My shins have swollen up. I'm developing stress fractures. Like, I'm in a lot of trouble. And Casey's like, oh man. And these dudes are just so optimistic. Like, there's no doubt in their mind, like, we're finishing this. We got to figure it out. We don't know how it's going to look. Excuse me, but we're finishing it, right? That's just the mindset of our team. And so we're like, I'm dying. I'm trying to figure out how to, like, take a step. And Casey's like, because Casey did all 100 marathons with me. And so Casey's like, hey man, wouldn't it be a lot of fun and amazing if on day 101, just me, you, and Aaron went out and we did an Ironman together? And I was like, F you, don't ever bring that up again. If you say that again, you're off the team. In fact, I'll never talk to you again. And he was like, got it, message received, right? And then fast forward, tons of struggle. Like, I'm so proud of this new book and documentary that's coming out. Just because of what we went through and the lessons that we got to learn that I then share with everybody. About day 96, I'm on the run trail. It's happening. We're doing the 100 now. Like, we figured out so many things along the way. We've endured. And it's day 96, and I looked at Casey on the run trail, and I said, hey, do you remember the question you asked me or what you proposed right at the beginning of the journey? And he was like, yeah, 101. He knew instantly what it was. And I looked at him and I said, I think it's possible. And it was interesting because, seriously, the third book I'm going to write is on perspective, because the only thing that changed was pretty much the only thing that changed was the perspective. When he first proposed it in days 6, 7, or 8, it was, there's no way I could do one more. And by 96, after we had all this experience, knowledge, and we were so close, now the phrase changes to what's one more, right? And so it goes from I could not do one more to what's one more, right? All depends on where you are on your journey and what that moment looks like.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, though, because for those of us that have achieved a big goal, right? Especially something physical. I think about when I did Zion Traverse, 50 miles across Zion National Park, right? And I remember climbing up out of Kolob Canyon, and I wanted to go to bed. I was done. I'm spent, right?
I know that feeling.
But as soon as I hit the road, I physically could not go any further. Like my body said, okay, now you reach the finish, you're done. And it just shut down, right? Like it didn't want to do anything. And I've seen that time and time again with my wife, right? Like and I've heard it said like the best time to sign up for a race is when you just finished one. When you're an ultra athlete, that's not necessarily the case because you don't ever want to suffer like that again.
No.
Because the body completely shuts down in those longer events. And so looking at 100, right? Like 100 consecutive days, and then to say, okay, like my body is going to say you're done, you hit your goal, and then go out and do one more is like, that's leaning a lot on perspective, right? That's leaning a lot on like, no, I'm capable, but it's this telling your body that, okay, like all the cards are stacked against me. I've spent 100 days, like I'm
Well,
wrecked. I
yeah,
can go do one more.
I think right there though showcases the power of the mind, right? So I think it would have been different had it not been planned. Like I had about 5 days to wrap my mind around it.
Yeah.
Someone like, because we didn't tell anybody, and we celebrate. Like I ran the 100th day like it was my last. I laid it all on the table. I wanted to give it everything I had. I didn't want people to think, oh, he's holding back for something, right? I wanted to lay it out on the line. And then we stayed at the event and the party till I signed every shirt and I stayed there till almost midnight. But I knew, and I didn't want to tip anything off, but I knew I was getting up, and so I had like 4 or 5 days to really framework it in my mind. I think it would have been different or a lot more challenging had I been stayed out as late as I did, went to bed, knowledge that I'm done, I don't have to get up tomorrow, and then someone knocks on my door, wakes me up, and says, "We're doing it again. Let's go." And I'd be like, "Gosh, I don't know if I can." Right? And obviously, I would have found a way because then you start to framework that moment. But I think it's very different if we can just the power of the mind. If you can prepare for something or have knowledge, and I love this too because we train a lot of athletes, and I know you guys have worked with a lot of athletes, being in the running space, and your wife coaches, and she's a high level athlete. But it's interesting. I'll have someone like train and run a half marathon, and they know that the 13.1 is the finish line, and they cross that line and they collapse and they've given everything they had.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, and then we're like, okay, we're gonna do a marathon, and I go, and then they get past that 13.1 and they're singing and dancing and they feel like $1,000,000 because mentally they know they're only halfway there. And so why did we collapse at the finish line at 13.1 in this scenario? And then in this scenario, we're fresh as can be and totally easy. A little bit of training
until we hit mile 20, and then it's like, oh wait, what the heck am I doing?
For sure. But again, to your point, it's that like the mindset that we have, and that like the mind knows when the finish line is, right?
Right, absolutely.
And then it dictates, okay, now we're shutting down. I protected you, I've done my job, and now it's over. And then we're like, collapse, and we're done.
So sometimes in life though, right? Like we don't have 5 days to plan. We don't have those 5 days to like, okay, I know I got to prepare myself, right? Like we may walk into our job today and the boss says, hey, by the way, we're laying you off or whatever, right? Like anything could come up that is like
the pandemic,
completely depleted. The pandemic, right? Like we could have February 2020, right? Like or March 2020, whatever, right? Like it can happen, right? And so how do we wrap our minds around that? How do we get the perspective? How do we settle into that? What are the things that we can learn from past experience to say, okay, I can do one more. I can get up one more day. I can go apply to one more job. I can.
Yeah. And I love this question. And I think it's super meaningful and impactful. And I apologize. It sounds like my dogs are having a party there for a second. I don't know if you could hear them, but I definitely could. But this is the exact reason why you show up in your life daily and you intentionally do things that make you uncomfortable. Whether that's a cold plunge, whether it's, I hate running, I'm still going to run today. Whatever it is, doing difficult things. Okay, I don't like this situation, but I'm going to go do it I'm uncomfortable. It actually scares me, but I'm still going to go do it on purpose with intent. And the reason you do that over and over again, I just flat out call it just doing something intentionally hard on purpose, intentionally, is because when that moment happens, you're ready for it. I guarantee you, Jeremy, you can look around your circle of friends, your family, whomever, the pandemic hits, and you knew exactly who had done something difficult in their lives before or prior to that moment because of how they handled it, because how they navigated it, because how they dissected it, how they emotionally worked it, all of it. And you could also tell those people who have never done anything hard in their lives and they just turned into a pile of mashed potatoes. And that's exactly why you do things that are difficult, because you have no idea when real difficulty is going to happen. And that's how you prepare yourself. I think it was Huberman that said, it's like, you can't, that part of your brain, I think he was talking to Goggins or something, but that part of your brain doesn't expand unless you actually do an activity that you dislike. And then it expands and grows. And now you become more mentally tough. Seriously, though, it's the number one question I get on the road. How do I become more mentally tough? And someone would say, oh, read my book. You can become more mentally tough. Or watch my YouTube. You become more, listen to Jeremy and I on this podcast. You become more, no, you have to take that knowledge and then apply it, right? And you got to go do something. And that's how you become more resilient or more tough.
So are there things like, so one of the things that you talk about a lot, right? Like is that it's the little things that lead to success in the big things, right? So what are some of the key things there that we can do to develop mental toughness, right? Like you talk about cold plunging, you talk about maybe going for a run when you don't want to. What are some like actionable items that people can say, okay, I can take away from this, and those are things that I can go do? Because I think, like, at least for me in my experience, like life ebbs and flows, right? Like there are times like I can look back at the past and I can say, okay, like this was great, right? Like I co-founded a footwear company. I received a master's degree, right? Like I've raised 4 awesome kids, right? Like I've married an amazing woman. Like those are highs, right? But then there's a lot of lows too, right? Like there's a lot of days where like some days it's just like, do I really want to get up? Do I really want to go work out? Like what are the things that we can do consistently to help either reduce the lows or bring the lows up a little higher so that they're not as low as they could be?
Yeah. And that's a great question too. I think in life, we have to have like the bare minimum that we'll accept, and then like the ideal. And the ideal for me is like, okay, I'm going to get up, I'm going to do my 2-hour workout, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to get my cold plunge, and then I've got a little bit of time. I'm going to do my red light therapy. I'm going to meditate, all these things, right? That's my ideal. But I have to be prepared for chaos to happen in my life from time to time. I could wake up and tires flat. Oh, crap. I gotta figure that out before I get to the airport. Kid woke up, needs a ride somewhere. Something happened. Oh, I forgot my lacrosse stick, whatever it is, right? Chaos can happen. And these are all like first world problems. I get it. But the reality is if I have the bare minimum setup that I can do, meaning, okay, at any point in time, I can do 15 air squats, 10 burpees, a wall sit, and 10 push-ups. It's going to take me 45 seconds, a minute, maybe 2, right? And then if I know that and I knock that out, that was my bare minimum. I did the best I could today, and I can move forward, right? You can't always hit the ideal. And I think what happens is we don't have a game plan for what the minimum standard is. And then we slip and we don't get it done. And then we allow those days to start to stack on top of each other. And now we're out of routine, and now we're being hard on ourselves and all these things. And so I think we just have to set ourselves up with, okay, this is all I can do today. And that's going to have to be good enough. Carlos, did I answer your question?
No, I think that's good perspective, right? Like because not very many of us are going to wake up day in and day out and go do an iron distance event, right? It's like,
I don't want to do that either, bro.
I don't know how many of us are even going to put that as our ideal, right? But I do think that
I'm just saying, if your goal is to work out every single day for an hour.
Yeah, no, right. Like I think if your ideal, right, is to say, okay, like I'm going to get to the gym for 45 minutes today, or I'm going to go do a 5-mile run, or like this is my ideal morning routine, right? Like I'm going to get up, I'm going to meditate, for 30 minutes, I'm going to do 30 minutes of yoga, I'm going to do 30 minutes of strength training, right? And then like the alarm doesn't go off and you get up at 7:30 instead of 5:30, right? And it's like, well, there's all my exercise time is shot, right? But I think I like that idea of like saying, okay, here's the bare minimum, right? Like, okay, at bare minimum, I need to pray and meditate for a couple minutes, right? I need to study something for a couple of minutes, and then I need to do some series of physical activity for 2 to 5 minutes. And so now my bare minimum becomes a 15-minute routine. And because I think a lot of times, like, at least in my life, right? Like, I'll set the ideal and it's like, okay, here it is. And then it gets to like 9 a.m. and it's like, I haven't even gone through a fifth of this ideal because whatever has come up. And now I'm flustered. I'm frustrated. It's like, okay, my day isn't how I wanted it to be. And now everything's kind of thrown off and I'm not mentally prepared for everything else that I've got to face throughout the day. But if I
I
can
think
be content with a minimum, right? And say, okay, as long as I get these things done, then my day is like, it's going to be fine. But ideally, I want to do all of these other things. And that's what I'm shooting for. But at bare minimum, I can be content. And I think being content is something that I'm learning a lot about right now, is the importance of contentment, because I do have big aspirations, right? Like, I want to accomplish a lot of things, but sometimes I just need to sit with contentment and let that be okay. And
yeah,
that's
I
not
think
easy for me.
it's not for me either. And I think along the same lines of contentment is I think we need to all give ourselves some grace. And man, if we really contrast and compare ourselves like to a lot of people, we're doing a great job and we're having an impact, and recognizing that we're not ever going to cross off everything on our list in one day. That's not possible. Especially if you've got big dreams, aspiration, goals, you're working towards something. And so maybe it's a great idea for someone to come up with like the Bear Five or whatever it is. And it's just like, regardless of whether you're going to do the 45 or whatever, take 5 minutes and knock out a 2 minute prayer, 2 minutes of gratitude, and a 2 minute of exercises. We'll call it 6 minutes. Now you've created momentum, and whatever happens between that. So if you figure out like the perfect 6 minutes for right when you wake up, then everything after that is like, okay, man, I've already won today. I've already created one. I've already done that, and now everything on top of that is bonus or gravy. And so I think if we can framework that, as long as we don't allow that to become the new normal, right? But I think
Right.
that first thing in the morning, checking off a win, getting a little bit of confidence and momentum, then we start to stack wins after that. And then if life gets in the way, we can like, well, at least I got my big win, right?
So what does a typical start to the Iron Cowboys day look like?
Yeah, recently I've I want to get back to my grassroots of racing and competitive. I'm really satisfied and done with these like really long endurance and suffering things. Over the past decade, I've kind of I've forgotten why I loved this sport to begin with. And it was the explosive, it was strength, it was racing, it was the community. And you do a lot really long endurance stuff. It's a lot of like long solo lonely suffering. I'm good. I'm satisfied. I got to reset my own history, and I'm good. And so now for me, I want to get back into racing, a little bit shorter distances, more for the fun, with community. And so I've got some key races next year that I want to get back to. I'm almost 50. And so that's kind of fun to kind of reinvent yourself. But for me, if I'm not on the road or traveling, like if I can't be at home, I try to instill some normality when I'm on the road. But in order to do that, here's my bare minimum. I wake up and I have a 15-minute morning flow, like a yoga that I do that includes some breath work. And so every single day I wake up and I'll do that, and it'll take me through that routine. And that kind of
15.
15. Yeah, 1
Okay.
5. Because I can do it in any hotel room. I can do it whatever. And it just takes me through, like, opens up my hips and opens up my, my chakras and my energies, and I express gratitude. And it's kind of like I'm setting my intentions for the day. I do some affirmations where I'm calling in like really positive stuff that's going to occur today, and like only good things happen to me, all these kind of things. And so really that's how I start every single day. And that's something that I can count on, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road or waking up in a foreign country or whatever it is, that 15 minutes really sets the tone for me. And then I have my other things that I want to accomplish. And like we just talked about, if I can't get to them, I know I've started my day in that way. And that consistency really helps me, because I do 60 plus events a year, plus racing. And so I'm gone a lot. And so to have that sense of routine and normality is really important and grounding for me.
No, that's great. I like that. I like the kind of okay, here's the bare minimum, right? And let's let that set stage, right? Like it's Newton's law of motions, right? Like what's in motion stays in motion. And so if we can get ourselves into motion first thing in the morning, um, we're gonna be more productive throughout the day. Uh,
Hardest thing to do is get moving, right?
yeah. So talk to us, like we kind of talked through the steps of where you went, right? Half iron to 50, 50, 50 to 100. And like your stories inspire many, right? Like you're on Prime Video, you've written 2 books, like you've got documentaries out there, like you've won some awards, you go, you speak. But what did it take to get there, right? Like kind of walk us through those early years before, like as you were like, okay, I'm gonna go do this thing, just primarily really the 2 world records.
Yeah, it comes down to the ability to dream and then acting upon it. Because there's a lot of people that dream, but then don't do anything with it. And it's interesting because every time I set one of those goals to go out and do it, whether it was the 1 Ironman or the half Ironman world record or the 30 Ironmans or whatever it was the biggest I could think and believe that I could do based off my experience. Now when I look back at the 22 half Ironmans in a year, I'm like, it's like laughable, not for everybody, but for me, where I am on my journey,
Yeah,
I'm like,
sure,
that's laughable.
sure.
But at the time, man, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And it was really difficult while I was doing it. And it's just, one of the lines I use from stage is you can't see the next challenge until you're ready for it. And that's why you have to show up and do what you mentioned before, do a lot of little things consistently over a long period of time. Like that's really how you win. And as you start to do those little things, and as you start to show up, all of a sudden you're standing on the top of a mountain. I've accomplished this goal. What has changed now is your belief system and the experiences that you have, and now more becomes possible. And we've all heard that when you're standing at the top of a mountain, you can now see the base of a mountain you couldn't see before or even knew existed. And so every time I would get to the top of that mountain for my belief system, I had changed. And all of a sudden I believed that more was possible. And I would be, okay, what's the best I can think of? Okay, it was 30 Ironmans in a year because the world record at the time was 20. And it was funny because I made the announcement. I said, I'm going to do 30 Ironmans to 11 countries. And they said, if you did 21, it would be a new world record. And I was like, yeah, but that's not what I believe I can do based on my knowledge and experience to this point. I believe that 30 is possible. And I think there's a pretty valuable lesson in there. I think society is currently looking at social media and their peers and their competition, and they're comparing themselves against the current standard of excellence instead of setting a goal in proportion to what they believe they can do or what is possible. And so that's why I settled on 30. And then the jump from 30 to 50, like 30 in a year to 50 consecutive, I truly believe that was the next natural step because of the experience that I had. When we announced the 50, everyone was like, dude, that's impossible. It can't be done. I mean, Ultra was like, yeah, 5 days, good luck, right? But they weren't looking at it from the perspective and experience that I was. And in those moments and in your moment and in everybody's moment in life that's listening to it, when you're doing something big, you are the most important person that needs to believe in you because, I mean, it's great to have that external support. It's great that you were an OG and supported me and believe that I could do it. But at the end of the day, just because you believe I can do it doesn't mean I do. And that's the most important person is you have to believe it's possible.
So you bring in social media, right? Like you bring in kind of, okay, what we see kind of dictates our beliefs. Does the opposite, do you see the opposite is true though, that sometimes like seeing all of, like, do you run into people that see your accomplishments and get discouraged because of it?
I don't think so.
I think in the sense that like, oh, I could never do what James did, and so like I can't really measure up, kind of mindset.
Yeah, I hear that a lot until they actually ask me that question or have done a deep dive into our history, because people see headlines, right? They see 30, they see 50, they see 100, and like, dude's different. Like, trust me, I'm not different. I'm not like I'm a below average white Canadian. But the reality is my journey started with a off the couch 4-mile fun run here in Orem, Utah on Thanksgiving that I struggled through. Literally struggled. Like women pushing their kids in strollers were blowing by me. And that's kind of a moment. And actually that day, my wife at Thanksgiving dinner, she's like, "Hey bro, you're pathetic. And I just signed you up for the Salt Lake City Marathon, figured it out." And I hated it. I hated running, and it led me to triathlon, and I loved the community and the dynamics of the swim, the bike, and the run. And I was terrible. And I think that's the point that everybody needs to understand is when we're looking at social media and quote unquote experts or mentors in these fields, we're forgetting that they're 10, 20, 30 years into their journey or endeavor. And we need to pause for a moment and recognize that every journey has a humble beginning, despite your knowledge of it. And man, my journey started so humbly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I have mastered my craft to the way that I perceive it. And I'm very, very good at it now. But it didn't start that way. And so I think that's a message that I would like to impart on people is don't compare yourself to greats in any field because they started somewhere. And if you choose not to start, you're missing out on an opportunity to be a great that could motivate, empower, and encourage someone else that's coming up the ranks.
No, I like that a lot. And you bring in mountains as a metaphor here a little bit, right? And I want to carry that metaphor just for a moment because I think to your point, like climbing Everest is a challenge that very few people are going to ever accomplish, right? Like it's a mighty feat. It's a giant mountain, right? Like
friggin' expensive.
It's super expensive, right? Like, but the thing about climbing Everest is in most cases it's done in stages. Like there's all the preparation beforehand, right? Like getting ready to be competent and able to climb that mountain. But taking on just the mountain itself is you've got to get to certain base camps and then you rest and you stop and you plateau and you adapt, you acclimate, right? Like, cause the oxygen is much thin, right? Like, and then you climb to the next base camp and do the same thing, right? And then there's the final push to the peak. And I think that that's so important for us as we look at goals, as we look at dreaming big, right? Is we might have a big someday goal, but what are the little things, what are the plateaus that we need to get to before we can get to that someday goal, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's so important, right? Like looking at you, you didn't jump into triathlon saying, you know what, someday I'm going to do 100 of these straight.
I couldn't have even dreamt it.
And that's the other thing, right? Like sometimes we don't even see the mountain that we're going to climb because we just need to focus on the little foothill right here, right? Like that's the one. Okay. And if I set the goal to climb the foothill, then I get to the top and I see, oh, there's a little bit more over there. Great. What can I do to get into that one? And then to the next one, right? Like, and then eventually it gets to, okay, now I conquered the really big one. And that's how most people end up climbing Everest anyway, because it was usually started hiking through the foothills, right? Like,
yeah, and every challenge that I did was a base camp.
Yeah.
And it was moments to pause and prepare and acclimate till we're ready to continue up the mountain. And then all of a sudden you see another mountain. And we experienced that when we rode our bikes up Kilimanjaro. We had to pause at base camps and make sure that our health was fine and everything was good. And I mean, we did, your wife's big into adventure racing, and we did the world's toughest race through Fiji. And you go through 5 major camps, and every camp you had to shut down as a team. They give you a new set of maps. You got to recalibrate. You got to get new equipment. And then you prepare yourself to go tackle that leg of the race, right? They didn't just say, okay, here's the start line, here's the finish line, and you got to do all these 100 things in between and carry all of your gear the whole time. Like that would
some adventure races do, but
well, you couldn't carry your pack raft, your bike.
Okay, you don't have to carry all of your stuff.
You couldn't do that. And so there's base camps that you set up in, and they're like, hey, this is your new set of maps. This is your new, direction on what to do. Take the knowledge that you learned from those previous stages of mountains and now apply them going forward. And that's how you become successful in life or whatever it is you have to do it. I tell my clients all the time, like, you can't go from 0 to 100. And now that we have the goal, that you've dreamt up the goal, now I need you to reverse engineer every step that it's going to take that we can possibly think of. And then a great book on this called The One Thing. And then you literally focus on the one thing that's going to move the needle, because you can't do step 5 until you do step 1. That's why people fail, is because they get off the couch and they want to go do 100 Ironmans. And they fail because they're not ready mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to do it. And you have, like, there's no cheat code to life, unfortunately. Like, it's taking your knocks and showing up. It's those peaks and valleys you mentioned. And I think both are incredibly valuable in our lives, and we learn different lessons during certain peaks and certain valleys. I think one of the greatest pieces of knowledge that we can take with us is the knowledge of this too shall pass. And that applies to the good and the bad. And we're never sitting in one of those peaks or valleys for too long. And just knowing that it's going to shift and energy is going to change and people are going to come in and out of your lives, and you're going to suffer, hopefully with the intent of growth. And then you're going to climb out of that valley and then hit another peak. And I think that's the beauty of life, is knowing it's purposeful and you're going to be taken through that, and it's for the benefit of you, the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. I've just finished the one thing about
Oh,
2
did you?
weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book.
No, I think Jay Papasan and Gary Keller wrote a great one, in really kind of succinctly talking about it, right? Like lining up those dominoes, and then it's being able to knock them down one at a time, right? Like focusing in on, okay, what's the one thing today that I can do that's going to bring me closer to what I want to accomplish this week, to what I want to accomplish this month, to eventually, right, that big someday goal. So it took a lot of sacrifice on this journey. Was it worth it?
Yeah, man. I think naivety is a great thing, because I mean, you've done some really hard things, and I think, had we known what those lows would have been and felt like, we probably, so we weren't going to like voluntarily sign up for that nonsense. But then recognizing it's part of the journey. I look back now and I miss that hustle and grind and planning and prep and of these big challenges and the figuring it all out. Like I do, I genuinely miss it. Man, I am so glad we did it though. Like, the sacrifice was infinitely worth it. Not only has my life changed, my family's life changed, but we now have an opportunity to go and have the impact to change the way other people show up in their lives. And to me, that's the greatest gift. My goal is not to make it to the mountaintop. My goal is to make it to the mountaintop with as many people as I can bring with me. And that, everybody asks, hey, what's next? I'm like, do you want me to die? But like, what's next is literally trying to help people accomplish their version of what we did, and helping them really win the conversations that we're having with ourselves. Because at the end of the day, you get this, Jeremy, like that internal dialogue that we have, the imposter syndrome and the bullies and everything that's in our own heads. Dude, you better figure out how to like yourself. You better figure out how to enjoy spending time with you. You better work on that individual so that they are a pleasant person to be around. Because guess what? You're never going to spend as much time with anybody that you do with yourself. You're never going to talk to anybody as much as you do with yourself. So you better learn how to manage that conversation and be really cool with the dude that's looking at you in the mirror.
Yeah. No, I think that's, yeah, absolutely powerful. Okay, so a lot of people look at your resume and they don't see failure. They see that success after success. But you and I both know that that's not necessarily true, right? Like, so hit us with a couple of failures that you've had, and then how did you respond to those failures?
It's interesting. I consider the 50 and the 100 a failure, because I didn't execute to perfection. And that's such a high standard, but it's a standard that I hold for myself. I can easily look at the mortgage company that we owned, a total failure. We lost everything during the economic crash. And how much of that was my responsibility and how much of that was outside of my control? There's been a lot of failures, and I've had to adjust my relationship with the term failure, because I now believe that failure is a choice. And I know that sounds strange, but let me just expand on that for a second. I could have never done the 100, and the 50 would be what it was. In fact, I still got hired today to do events and corporate speaking and coaching, and they didn't even know about the 100. They love the 50.
Yeah.
And in my mind, that the 50 was a failure. And that's the reason I did the 100, because I wanted to reset my own history and do it better. Now, in life, here's the biggest kicker, and what everyone needs to realize: we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. In fact, I believe the purpose of life is to make mistakes. Mistakes remain a failure if you don't have the emotional intelligence to pause, analyze it, take accountability, and then change it for the better, and then go and erase that failure. because you've learned from it. So now it's no longer a failure. It was a learning opportunity to be better. And so, yes, I could list off very apparent and obvious failures in my life or missteps that I've had. But if somebody asks me right now, have you ever failed in your life? The answer is no, because I've taken those failures. I've learned what I've needed to, hopefully learned what I've needed to learn from them, and I apply them to other parts of my life. If you don't do that, then they remain a failure, and that's the choice that you're making.
Yeah, I think, well, again, it goes back to perspective, right? Like looking at, like, because if we dwell in where we have failed or things that have happened, be it by our choice or by external forces, right? Like we can choose to either act or be acted upon. And if I choose to be acted upon, then I've given into failure, right? But if I choose to act and step forward and rise above it, I can overcome that failure and it becomes a stepping stone and a learning
Well,
opportunity.
I think you can recognize that there's victims that are walking around us. And a victim is simply a person that has bought into the belief that they're a failure without learning the lesson that they need from it. And now going forward, they do things, they act in accordance in a way to prove and validate their belief that they're a failure. And so, yes, it comes down to a choice in how you act. And a victim doesn't have to be a victim. They're choosing to be so. In fact, I talked about this yesterday too. One of my favorite shows is Survivor. And I can only imagine your wife is a huge fan of the show, and maybe you, and I'd love to see your wife be on the show. She would win. She would be just so unassuming because she's this little tiny powerhouse. But she's so mentally tough and strong. Anyways, I'm watching the first 2 episodes, and there's this one guy, and immediately he was like, dude, I can tell nobody in this tribe likes me, and I'm the bottom of this thing. And nobody had said any of that to him, right? From what we saw on camera. But the whole tribe was like looking around going, what is this dude talking about? And it was his perspective based on his previous experience in his life. And he was full on being the victim in the situation. And then he's calling it out almost so that it comes to fruition to validate his belief system that he is this failure. And it was just really fascinating for me, like from the outside perspective looking in on how he was reacting when it was fully his perspective and not really the perspective of the tribe. Like he was just like trying to validate his belief system from past failures or social interactions that he had had. So it was really fascinating for me to watch that unfold.
Interesting. So so I think what we would look at, and I think what you would look at would answer this question probably very differently. But what is your greatest accomplishment?
Yeah, that's Dana White said it the other day. He's like, my legacy is being a father. And, I finish every one of my stage presentations with, there's no success outside your home that'll ever compensate for failure inside your home. And that has become my overarching message that I want people to understand is like the power of family and community. And really that's the biggest impact that we can have. And that's what I want to be known for, is being a hero in my own home and providing a safe and comfortable and fun environment for those around me.
No, I love that answer. I think it's like it becomes easy for a lot of people to look at what you've done and almost kind of throw shade at like, well, so much time away from your family, like you sacrificed financially for your like you sacrificed your family's financial future for some of your fitness goals.
Some of the threads online when we were on the 50 was like, this is child abuse. And dude, my kids speak so fondly of the memories that they had on these journeys and these adventures. And to be honest with you, they got a front row seat, not on purpose, but they got a front row seat, like looking back on it, they got a front row seat to teamwork and sacrifice and discomfort and joy and euphoria and all these emotions that they got to experience. But they got to understand what commitment looks like. They got to understand what teamwork looks like. They got to understand all these amazing attributes that I think these up and coming generations need to have to become leaders in the world. And call it luck or whatever. I've got amazing kids, and I don't think it's because of my parenting. I think it's because they had a front row seat to these kinds of things that went on. And kids are products of their environments, and they pick up on things, and they try to emulate it. And man, I got 5 standout kids. It's all
Yeah, and
Sonny's fault.
no, I absolutely. Sonny probably deserves a lot of that, right? Like my wife does as well. And I think it's really interesting. You look at just the power of emotional intelligence as they see their parents accomplish great things, as they get out and see the world outside of the local community bubble, as they experience a lot of these things. And those are the things that you gave your children, right? And I think that there are moments of misstep or moments of struggle and sacrifice within what you built in kind of becoming who you are today, right? And but yet they saw you overcome those things,
Well, I
not
think,
get burdened down by those things.
yeah, and I think that that was part of it was they saw us fail. They saw us misstep. They saw us struggle. They saw us cry. They saw all of these things. And then more importantly, they saw how we reacted to it, how we moved through it, how we learned from it, and then continued on to success. And so it was just these great examples of like, there's going to be failures, stumbling blocks, difficulties, challenges along the way. And then we get to choose how we navigate them and come out on the other side. That's the point. That's the most important. And my kids, like I said, they had a front row seat to all of that.
Yeah, which is such a powerful lesson for them. So, including the ice cream cone that they got to eat in all 50 states. So,
That's right.
as we wrap, I just want to fire off some rapid fire questions here.
Okay.
So I'll fire them off rapid. You can answer them however you want. So, what frightens you? Nothing at all. Okay, not even a lion in the wilderness.
Fear is just an emotion.
Fair. What
I mean,
inspires?
okay, wait. Yeah. If I'm thrown off of the safari truck and it's me and a lion, yeah, I'm terrified just because I have zero chance in that scenario. But like we live in Utah, right? And so like, what are like real things that scare me? Like it would have to be such an odd thing. But like this is a phrase that I like, catastrophizing. So like, if I was on an airplane that's currently being hijacked, yes, I'm going to be a little bit scared, but I don't even think of those moments in happening. And so it's a really hard question. So the answer, like currently sitting here right now, having a conversation with you, like I'm not scared of anything.
That's fair. I think
I'm
we
scared
can
of your
have
wife. I'm scared of while racing.
I'm scared of my wife while racing too, but what inspires you?
Really, what inspires me is my kids. Watching them come into their own and doing their thing and chasing their passions, not caring what anybody thinks, really inspires me. And then two, like as the question quickly becomes like, who motivates the motivator, right? Because that's my job, right? And I hate that. But like, who motivates the motivator? And it's the stories and messages that now get sent to us from around the world where they say, hey, I was dealing with this. I watched this, and these are the changes that I've made. And so what motivates me is those stories that keep coming in, because I always think, man, if I stop, who am I missing an opportunity to give that motivation to where hopefully they'll send it back to me. And so it's kind of this like constant exchange of motivation and inspiration.
Yeah, for sure. What book are you reading right now?
I am reading The Energy Bus. Short,
Not
easy
familiar
read.
with that one.
Yeah, it's really good.
Okay, I'll have to check that one out. What book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you would highly recommend to others?
I just finished reading my new book, Iron Hope, for Audible. And so I read it like 15 times, every sentence over and over again. And I think it's going to be,
there you go.
I think it's going to be an insanely motivational, impactful book. It is what the title says. It's Iron Hope. And I do believe that hope is life. The most impactful book I've ever read is Man's Search for Meaning. And in that, it's a story about hope.
Yeah, and Viktor Frankl's phenomenal.
Dr. Viktor Frankl could tell the moment that somebody lost hope because they died. And so that is how powerful hope is. And that's why we titled our book.
Yeah, no, if you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, you got to go get that one right away, because that book is phenomenal.
The other book that'll change your life is a manuscript that was written in the 1930s by Napoleon Hill, Outwitting the Devil.
Yeah, it's a published book now.
It is.
So you can pick it up on Amazon, or
and it's actually most fun to listen on Audible because they use different voices for the conversation.
Okay.
And it's actually really, really good. It's a great listen.
Yeah, so my buddy and coach Spence Taggart has talked about that one a lot. So that one actually is sitting right behind me in the stack of new books that I
Dude,
just
let me know
got,
what you
and
think when you read it. It's
so
good. It's an
it's on my
annual listen for me.
okay. Yeah, that one's in the queue. So I'm currently reading The Way of the Superior Man.
Oh, never heard that one.
So that one's really good too. If you haven't read that one, you ought to check that
Check
one
that
out.
one out.
So, but yeah, Outwitting the Devil is in the queue. So that one's back here ready to go. What's your favorite place you've traveled to in the past and why?
And I don't know if that was my favorite, but it was the most interesting kind of stretch I did. I did a stretch of speaking where I went like Egypt, Israel, Oman, Jordan, Saudi, Dubai. Like it was like India. Like it was a whole stretch. I was there for like 2, 3 weeks. And it's a different part of the world.
Yeah.
Like this, like you can go to Australia and there's some differences, but it's, very Americanized, or Canada, or even South America. Dude, you want culture shock? Go to Saudi Arabia. Like I went there and I was like, dude, I am very far from it. And so it was just really, I think the most enjoyable thing for me now, having traveled a lot of the world, I mean, 56 countries, is just that how far apart we are, but how close we are as humans, and the
Yeah.
commonalities, and the goal. I believe everyone just wants to be loved, accepted, and part of a community. And I saw that in everywhere that I've been and traveled to. And so it was just so refreshing to me. Like, they live so far away, but they're just like me. And they really, at the end of the day, want the same thing. And that's camaraderie. And that's telling you did a great job, and being surrounded by really cool people and feeling loved and appreciated, and being part of something. I think really, if the pandemic showed us anything, that's what we need, crave, and want as humans and as a civilization.
Yep, absolutely. Travel is inspiring because it breaks down walls, it breaks down barriers because we do see that people are people, right? Like we're all humans living a human experience and striving to just feel part of our community, feel part and connected, and just seeking for the most part to be good. And it breaks down a lot of fear when we get out and start to see and meet other people that are different than ourselves. Powerful, awesome, James. What else are you working on? Like you've got some races you're doing, you're speaking. What else is in the queue?
Yeah, we've got our Iron Hope book right now for pre-launch. It comes out and starts ships in January 21. February 7th and 8th, we have a live event here in Provo, Utah, bringing in speakers. It's going to be 2 full days of fun and breath work and working out and doing some fun things. I'm racing in Croatia, doing a 5-day mountain bike race. And then I'm trying to get back to the World Championships and the half Ironman. So we're going to Mont Tremblant, and we're going to do race the half Ironman. And then, just family and fun and getting on stages. And secretly, we're writing a screenplay, which is almost done. I'm going to the Emmys tomorrow. Like, dude, it's just so crazy. Like, seriously, you and I rewind 20 years ago. We're sitting down, you're starting Ultra, and I'm, dreaming these crazy things. No way we like write out that everything that we've both accomplished. And be like, yeah, that one day we're going to be sitting here rapping, in our studios talking about that. And I think that's kind of one of the most important lessons is just keep showing up, chasing your dreams. And then one day, holy hell, you're looking around going, we did that. Like, that's incredible. And then you have that experience, and then you get to show up and continue to dream every single day. Like, I don't even think I've like tipped the iceberg, or like coming close to the tip of it, to like what we're doing and where we're going. And so, man, future's bright, super exciting. And I get to wake up every single day and pray my own future.
That's awesome. So where can people keep up with you?
Yeah, best place is on Instagram. Iron Cowboy James is the handle. And then everything is flows through our website, www.ironcowboy.com.
Okay. We'll throw those in the show notes. James, thanks for your time today. This was awesome. I think we could tell stories and keep going for another couple hours, but for the sake of time, we'll cap it here. So thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, Jeremy.